Welcome back, everyone. This is the Oracle Decodes, the Weighing of the Heart Ritual, Ancient Egypt, Part 3. Much of what we're going to be decoding in this piece is going to come right out of what is known as the Ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. This is a photo I took of the beautiful book I happen to own, the translation of the Book of the Dead given by Raymond O. Faulkner with an introduction by James P. Allen, curator of the Department of Egyptian Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And though I'll be using some of the images in the information found within this beautiful book that I own, I do try to share online sources with you that are freely available for you to find this information out on your own, as well as verifying everything I'm showing you in an easy way. And some of what we're going to look at in this piece you can also find in those sources easily online, like Wikipedia, for example, to get you started. So we're going to pick up from where we left off in our decoding of ancient Egypt. So if you haven't already taken a look at our first two pieces of our videos where we're decoding ancient Egyptian myths and symbols, I recommend that you at least take a look at those first before coming back here to this third decoding of ancient Egypt. Now, we've already learned in the previous two pieces that the myth of Osiris essentially involves the establishment of the divine royal lineage, and where we left off in the story was how it was after Osiris became Egypt's first mummy and ruler of the dead, passing his kingship, or the divine right to rule he had, to his divinely conceived son Horus. So the son of Osiris and his queen Isis, Horus, who as his elder self, Horus was triumphant over his murderous uncle Set, as we saw in the previous piece. And the myth establishing Horus then as the king or ruler or god of the living was put in place, while his father Osiris continued on as ruler of the Duat, or land of the dead. The ancient Egyptians were not just telling mythical tales here about the divine royal lineage and right to rule and how that was established, but they were also tying this to cosmology, their religious beliefs and practices, particularly what is happening concerning the soul when someone dies. The ancient Egypt's myths and symbols are tying together the concepts of life and death, day and night, good and evil, and, as we will see, stories or myths to set the timeline or the calendar or the law through the divine right to rule over people on earth, all into one cohesive storyline. And even though we're looking at here what is some 4,000-year-old or older myths, we're finding that it's the exact same group of storytellers that are still using these same kinds of stories for the very same reasons today. In ancient Egypt, these stories eventually became so well known and practiced throughout the religion of ancient Egypt that the Book of the Dead eventually became something that was available to the quote-unquote common people, not just the pharaohs, as the ideas about the afterlife were once reserved only for. Now, by the time that the Book of the Dead was common amongst the quote-unquote common people, this gave the afterlife journey accessibility to those quote-unquote common people. Now, one of the most well-known parts of this story of the deceased journey into the afterlife involves essentially a soul being judged by Osiris. For the deceased's moral worthiness, that's the issue. Whether the deceased soul is worthy of being granted life into the afterlife, or the heavens you can think of, or into the light with the other gods. Or would that soul face another fate, being found unworthy and facing death for the second and final time, total darkness. Now, this part of the story that we're coming to here to decode is known as the Weighing of the Heart Ritual, and this comes from the Book of the Dead. And this is how the ancient Egyptians showed it to us in these images. Now, at the top of this image you'll see that there's 12 gods and goddesses seated. And they're going to be the ones looking on and taking note of the results of the deceased weighing of their heart to see if their soul is found to be good enough for admittance into the gods' realm of the eternal. And notice that there's 12 of them, just like there's 12 known constellations of the zodiac that circle the ecliptic arc. The scales in the middle of the image is where on one side the deceased's heart is placed, and on the other, something called the feather of Maat. Maat, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. The jackal-headed god, or the dog-headed god, called Anubis, is the one who's doing the weighing of the deceased's heart against the feather of Maat. The result, whether the soul passes, is recorded by the god Thoth, the god of knowledge and wisdom and writing, the ibis bird-headed god that's standing there behind Anubis. If the soul is found to be unworthy of a place in the afterlife to live eternally in the heavens with the gods, the deceased's heart is then given to Amit, the mixture of crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus creature that devours the deceased's unworthy heart, and their journey ends there, a second and permanent death this time. If you look to the left side of the scales, you'll see a little human-headed bird creature, known in the ancient Egyptian belief structure. It's a part of the soul they called the Ba. So the ancient Egyptian beliefs about the structure of our being, specifically as it relates to the concept of the soul, is in many ways similar, but in others very different from what many of us are taught today in more modern belief systems. One significant difference that we're all very familiar with already, I think, knowing that Osiris was said to be the first of Egypt's mummies, the tradition of mummification, as the ancient Egyptians believed it to be, was crucial to preserve the physical body, so as to assure a successful reunification of specifically two aspects of being in the belief system. Now, these two aspects of being you can think of as two parts of the soul that split upon death, known to the ancient Egyptians as the Ba and the Ka. And it's in bringing these two aspects of the soul back together of the deceased is what the weighing of the heart ritual is all about. Because if the deceased is found worthy, the Ba and the Ka of that person being reunited by the judgment of Osiris, then the deceased is transfigured, or you can think of it like glorified, reunited to a higher level, the soul is, and this higher level soul, or transfigured soul, is called an Ak. So before we get to decoding this, let's just take a few more pieces of info that you can find on Wikipedia about specifically these ancient Egyptian ideas about these two, or in this case, what is going to be a third soul part. So let's start with the Ka. Wikipedia tells us that the Ka is something we would think of as perhaps the spirit, or the divine spark, or vital essence, that part of life that is found to be in every living thing. The ancient Egyptians believed that bodies of children were created on the potter's wheel and sent to the wombs of their mothers. The Ka was being provided sustenance through food and drink the whole time, even after death, which is why Ka statues were placed in tombs of the deceased and were offered food and drink. Not that the Egyptians were believing that the actual food and drink would be consumed by the person's Ka, but that it would be the Ka of the food or drink, the essence of the food or drink, you can think of it as, that would be consumed by the person's Ka and would sustain the deceased's Ka for the reunification with the Ba. So Wikipedia tells us that the Ba is something more comparable to what we'd call today our personality. You can think of it as all the characteristics about you that makes you a unique being. The Egyptians believed that the Ba would return to the deceased tomb to be with the mummy, thinking that the body would be still living, not in the form found in the tomb, but in its, you can think of it like its ghostly form. After the deceased's heart has been judged worthy, then it's the body, the ba, and the ka that are reunited, re-energized, or revivified. Just like in the myth, the re-energizing of the sun as it meets with Osiris in the duat, this reuniting re-energizes the sun so that it can be born anew again in each new day. Like the worthy's soul has been revivified or transfigured or glorified into a new complete soul and granted permission then or entrance into the afterlife to be in a realm with the gods eternally. And this transfigured or complete soul, the Egyptians called the Ak. All right, so now let's get to decoding all of this. We've queued up a screenshot in Stellarium once again from a location on Earth from a city called the 6th of October in Egypt. And we've seen this location from this Sky Story location before. This is 11 miles away from the pyramids and Sphinx at Giza. And we're looking once again up at that very special place in the sky we've been calling the real oracle or the real all-seeing eye. This is the real secret decoder ring in the sky that holds all the keys to unlocking all of the most famous stories from ancient to modern times, as we are discovering here. We find it by facing due south and paying attention to the area in the sky where the arc of the ecliptic crosses the north-south meridian line, a place we've already decoded the ancient Egyptians called the Ankh. In this screenshot, we queued up the date commonly called July 1st of 2020. So we're looking once again, like we have been in previous pieces, at the summer solstice time of year, as we call it today. And the time of day that we chose to start with for this decoding is the last hour before the sun begins to set in the west. Because, as you'll see from this view, very high in the northern sky is a constellation we nowadays call Camelopardalis, or the giraffe. But for this story, the ancient Egyptians called this constellation Maat. And you can see by its shape how the storytellers imagined it to look like a feather. The feather of Maat, as we will see, the deceased's heart is weighed against. And you can see how when the ancient Egyptians showed a representation of how the goddess Maat was imagined to look, they always had the feather that's shaped just like the constellation she represents on top of her head. But I had to start here with this screenshot the hour before sunset because we've seen many times before that the trees put in the landscape of Stellarium also make some of what's in the Sky Story a little bit more difficult to see. So I wanted to make sure you could see the shape that the giraffe, or Maat, makes in the Sky Story clearly before Stellarium starts hiding her behind trees as we follow her path in the story. So here we are now at sunset, and you can see Maat is on the move now, partly hidden behind a tree. And remember, it's at this time of the year that we're looking at here, just 10 days past the summer solstice, where the constellation we call today Ophiuchus is found completely risen over the Earth's horizon in the east, beginning the night, known to the initiated priest, king, or pharaoh class in ancient Egypt as Osiris, the ruler of the night, that they called the Duat, or the land of the dead. 2 hours now after the sun is set, now definitely into the night, the stage is being set for the ritual you can see that we're decoding, the weighing of the heart, that Osiris, ruler of the land of the dead, will stand as judge in. And as you can see, both the constellations known nowadays as the giraffe has moved closer to the north-south meridian line, or the feather of Maat has moved closer to it, high above in the northern sky, along with the constellation known nowadays as Ophiuchus, or Osiris in this story, is also moving closer to that special place the ancient Egyptians called the Ankh, where Osiris will be judging the outcome of the weighing of the heart of the deceased, which is about to commence. The goal, remember, being here in this ritual, the reunification of the Ka and the Ba. The Ka, we're decoding here, being the constellation we've seen before in a few other decodings, the constellation of Hercules. And take a look, the Ka depicted in Egyptian hieroglyphs is arms in a square with two raised hands at the end. So remember, tying this to what we've already learned, that in ancient Egypt, they believed that the body of each person was created on a potter's wheel. Putting all of this together, as we look at the shape of the constellation known nowadays as Hercules, how it's shaped in the sky, you can see why the hieroglyph for the Ka was chosen to represent this constellation, and how this part of the myth is starting to make more sense. The goal is reunifying the Ka with the Ba. In the sky story, we can see it's known nowadays as the constellation of Aquila, the eagle. Also looking to the ancient Egyptians like a bird as well. And in this story, it's the deceased's unique personality, the doer of the deeds in life, part of the soul, that will be judged, and what fate will be given to it by Osiris and the other gods witnessing and present. If it's the reunification of the Ka and the Ba, and they are transfigured and glorified to live eternally in the presence of the gods in the afterlife, this is represented by the constellation known nowadays as Cygnus, the swan, the glorified or transfigured soul known in this story as the Ak. Note that here, 2 hours after sunset, the beginning of night, it's where all three of these constellations we're going to track now, Hercules, Aquila, and Cygnus, or the Ka, the Ba, and the Ak, are all at this time together on the east side of the north-south meridian line. It's the following hour we can see now, as up in the northern sky, the feather of Maat is now touching the north-south meridian line, or the feather of Maat is placed on one side of the scale, and on the other, the deceased's heart is being weighed against. If you follow the north-south meridian line down to where it meets the arc of the ecliptic, you can see that it's that hour that Libra, known nowadays as the scale, is found to be right at the cross of the arc of the ecliptic and the north-south meridian line, or the Egyptians' Ankh, along with the constellation known nowadays as Lupus, the wolf. But in this story, the ancient Egyptians called him the dog-headed god Anubis, the funerary god who does the weighing of the deceased's heart on the scales in this myth. The next hour, we see now the constellation known as Hercules has lined up on the north-south meridian line, with the constellation known as Ophiuchus, or Osiris to the ancient Egyptians, right below it, right in the position to be the judge of the weighing of the heart of the deceased that Anubis has just performed. And we can see it's Anubis, known nowadays as Lupus, that's now moved off the cross of the north-south meridian, or the Ankh area, and it's now the constellation we know nowadays as Scorpio that is found there to take its place. Interpreted by the ancient Egyptians, Scorpio is, looking more to them, like an ibis bird, the god of knowledge and wisdom, and the god of writing, Thoth. Now remember from our second piece of decoding ancient Egypt, when we were looking at the contendings of Horus and Set, we talked about the part of the myth that included the creation of the god Thoth that we're looking at here, who's standing there behind Anubis recording the weighing of the heart result. So we're going to zoom in on this constellation we know nowadays as Scorpio a little bit here, so we can get a closer look at the god Thoth and where and with who we will find him around the summer solstice time of year. So look, when he's drawn in some representations, Thoth is pictured with a triple-pointed crown on his head. And that starts making sense when comparing it to the constellation of Scorpio and how the front of that constellation is shaped. And also note the moon, appearing to be at the open beak of this ibis bird-headed god Thoth. When we decoded the contendings of Horus and Set, remember that the eye that Horus loses in the battle with Set is the moon. The moon that moved, remember, from Orion's or Horus the Elder's hand, found there on the summer solstice, but the following day moved to the constellation of Gemini or Set. And remember that in this myth, it's also through trickery that Horus and Isis get Set to eat Horus's semen unknowingly that they placed on his favorite food, lettuce. And when the gods, to determine who will be the ruler of all of Egypt, they call forth Horus's semen as proof of domination and victory, and it comes forth from Set's forehead. And this is said that this orb came through Set's third eye area, and this is how the god Thoth was born. Now you can see why the god Thoth was associated both with the moon in this myth and with knowledge and wisdom. The god Thoth, or the constellation of Scorpio as we call it nowadays, recording the weighing of the heart result, looking like the moon coming from his mouth. 2 hours later, we see the constellation of Hercules, or the ancient Egyptians' Ka, has moved to the west side now of the north-south meridian line. But Aquila, take note, or the Ba, is still found to the east side of the north-south meridian line. The question now to be resolved is whether the verdict for the deceased is going to be reunification of the Ka and the Ba to be transfigured into the Ak. The constellation of Cygnus, note, is still also on the east side of the north-south meridian line, and it's the deceased Ba, or the constellation of Aquila, found to be touching the north-south meridian line, where the Ba is now in this myth testifying to the god of the dead Osiris and the other gods that witness about the Ba's own unique life, personality, and deeds while living. If it's a permanent second death, the verdict that's rendered, next in the myth pictured here, we're taking a look at Amit, who devours the heart of the unworthy, and it's the constellation known nowadays as Sagittarius, the centaur. Half man, half horse. But to the ancient Egyptians, this same constellation was a combination of crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus creature. They called Amit. And it's Sagittarius, or Amit, in this story that is now found to be lined up at that special crossing point of the north-south meridian line in the arc of the ecliptic, or the Egyptians' Ankh. 3 hours later, we see now that the constellation known as Ophiuchus today, or Osiris to the ancient Egyptians, is now just above the western horizon of the earth, and the constellations with him are Hercules, Aquila, and Cygnus. They've all crossed over to the west side of the north-south meridian line and have joined Osiris, the ruler of the Duat, or the land of the dead. And as we're nearing the end of night, or you can think of, in other words, the Ka, the Ba, have been reunited in the west, while it's the constellation of Taurus, what we know from our first and second pieces of decoding ancient Egypt, Taurus being the wife of Osiris, the goddess Isis in these myths, she's rising in conjunction with the planet Venus above the eastern horizon here, so is present as well. 2 more hours later, when the sun is just about to come over the eastern horizon, or when the sun and Osiris unite, and this reuniting re-energizes the sun ensuring another new day. Note that it's the constellation of Ophiuchus, or Osiris, that's descending into the western horizon as the sun is coming up in the east, making this part of the story easy to see. The constellations of Hercules and Aquila, or the Ka and the Ba, are now glorified and transfigured by the energy of the light of day, or the sun. And over the next 2 hours, these constellations will also descend in the west, leaving the constellation of Cygnus, or the Ak, left. As the baby Horus is spreading his wings, having just crossed over the special place in the sky we're calling the Egyptians Ankh, also notice that at the same time the constellation of Orion, or Horus the Elder, the falcon-headed god, the god of the living, is just now rising again in the east, representing both the continuation of the divine right to rule and the story of the ancient Egyptian afterlife and the path to it for each deceased. All told within this one amazing sky story given to us by the ancient Egyptian civilization, perhaps more than 4,000 years old. And it's once again been my honor to know how to decode it so this knowledge and wisdom could be seen clearly and shared with all of you. We'll end things here for now, and until next time, may your heart be light and may you be well.